It's hell on earth out there. Well, seeing as the vampire apocalypse is upon us, I should probably tie up some loose ends. Thankfully, my Switch ports of BloodRayne arrived from Limited Run Games. BloodRayne 1 and 2 got remastered, and they even released the Metroidvania game BloodRayne's Betrayal. Fresh bites. Well, I probably only have time to look at one more game before the monsters get here. And since I previously covered BloodRayne, let's look at BloodRayne 2 on the Switch. It's time to see how the world was painted red, how the sun was blocked from the sky, and how the world fell to vampires. Before we look at BloodRayne 2, let's look back at BloodRayne, specifically comparing the original Xbox version to the new Switch remastered version. The new versions feature an improved resolution and widescreen support during gameplay. Also, textures and character models appear enhanced. You can also see a lot of difference with sharper edges, and things like water look much clearer. Overall, I think it looks great. I do have some small complaints, however, the first of which being that the loading screens clearly look like they've been stretched to fit a wider screen, and that doesn't look right at all. My other problem is that I encountered some significant slowdown during a boss battle. More on that later. As we move on from the events of the first game, where Rayne went to hell and back against the forces of darkness and prevailed. Rayne is once again on the side of the Brimstone Society. It is appropriately Halloween, and we are in the modern age. Rayne is accompanied and aided by her new Brimstone Society partner and informant, Severin. For this mission, Rayne aims to infiltrate the estate of one Dario Zarensky during a gathering by blending into Zarensky's, at this time, high social party guests to investigate. Zarensky is a vampire offspring of Kagan, and Kagan also created Rayne, making Zarensky Rayne's estranged half-brother. After making face-to-face, Severin informs Rayne of a secure area off limits, and he prompts Rayne to check it out. Rayne then equips her signature blades and sets out on her way. Beyond the veil, we now control Rayne inside of Zarensky's mansion proper, and are now informed of basic controls like moving and attacking, and feeding on the blood of your enemies to regain health. I found out the hard way you don't learn all the tricks you need in the tutorial, and I made the game a lot harder on myself, wrongly assuming it played identically to its predecessor, because I didn't know any different at the time. Mainly, I had no idea you could dodge and parry enemy blows, and this made the game a lot more difficult in the early going until I accidentally pressed the right button and found out you could defend. Speaking of pressing the wrong button, my only actual complaint about the controls that isn't due to my own lack of information is ironically the objective hints, which informs you of your current tasks. This is seen by clicking in the movement thumbstick, and it's really annoying because I found myself accidentally bringing up this screen a lot when trying to move quickly and putting slightly too much pressure on the thumbstick, clicking it in. The enemies for this tutorial section are thugs, which will appear as regular combatants throughout the game as both humans and as vampires. They'll be dressed differently and can be armed with a variety of different weapons, both melee and ranged. Here, we'll use the thugs to learn how to use Rayne's premier gadget for this game, the Harpoon Grapple Claw. This weapon is vastly improved from the previous game, where instead of just drawing enemies closer to Rayne like it used to, Rayne can now throw thugs in any direction, and into obstacles, and even impale enemies onto scenery as well. Mastery of this gadget will be vital to solve combat puzzles and proceed past certain sections later in the game. The game also informs you of some of Rayne's many powers, of which you'll learn more as the game progresses. To begin with, you can use Dilated Perception, which lets you slow down time to dodge bullets and move faster, And you can also activate Aura Vision, which makes things more clear. In this case, it reveals a secret vampire lair. These areas are normally a safe haven, and contain a blood fountain for you to restock, but in this instance, it's a trap, and our first boss battle is ready for us. Much like Rayne would be, our foe is dressed in red and black, and they are a Dhampir warrior, and are ready to challenge our hero. A battle ensues, and at this point, Rayne utilizes her Blood Rage ability, using her powers built up from the carnage Rayne has unleashed to deal more damage and take less from her opponent. Blood Rage's power should make short work of this enemy Dhampir, and I say should because, as I mentioned earlier, at this point in the game I had not figured out how to properly defend myself from oncoming attacks at all, and this fight ended up being unnecessarily difficult, but nonetheless, victory is had. After defeating the Dhampir, Rayne unlocks a new technique, the Twisted Wind attack. You often gain new abilities from defeating bosses, and some of them are really good. Honestly, I think I forgot about most of these abilities throughout the game right after learning them, and as a result I rarely used them, if I ever used them at all when it wasn't actually required to do so. Which is a shame, because you get some incredibly useful powers later on, like a Ghost Feed ability that makes a spectral version of Rayne to feed on enemies, reviving your HP and letting you continue to fight normally so you aren't vulnerable when feeding like you normally would be. Anyway, at the end of this encounter, you are required to use an ability, in this case Aura Vision, to escape through a secret door. As Rayne exits the vampire lair, she is reminded of her vampire father, Kagan, from a portrait hanging in Zarensky's estate. She ponders on her personal mission as her mind flashes back to the past, in her formative time at the Brimstone headquarters. Held back by fire, Rayne watched in horror as Kagan ransacked Brimstone's blood library for an artifact known as the Vesper Shards, which he mused could be used to destroy all vampires by Brimstone, including what he called half-breeds like Rayne. Kagan would continue to taunt Rayne, revealing a tortured Sir Tremaine, expiring in his grasp. Professor Tremaine was responsible for guiding Rayne away from the dark path other spawn of Kagan fell to, and Sir Tremaine was like a true father figure to Rayne. As she watched on, Sir Tremaine produced a grenade he was hiding on himself, and as it detonates, the explosion takes out Kagan and his allies, leaving Rayne alone. Rayne reaffirms that after Kagan took away her family, she would sever the existing bloodline of Kagan that remains, a task she has spent the past 6 decades on. As Rayne makes her way out to the mansion courtyard, there's some admittedly frustrating jumping and platforming required, until Rayne ascends scaffolding to the roof. From the roof, Rayne breaks into another secure area of the estate. Here she discovers a legendary weapon Zarensky has been hiding, the Carpathian Dragons, twin pistols which alchemically process the Dhampir wielding them's blood into vampire lethal projectiles. The downside is that once you are depleted of the resource required, it'll drain your own life instead. This weapon upgrades as you go, eventually gaining flaming and even explosive rounds, so despite the ammunition drawback, the Carpathian Dragons uncovered here will become invaluable at defeating certain enemies and bosses later on. Once Rayne's tested her new toys and endured some more rather frustrating platforming, it's onwards to Rayne's next target. After reconvening with Severin, Rayne heads to the ballroom proper to greet her dance partner. Zarensky has destroyed all of the high-profile guests lured to his engagement, and now he's face to face with Rayne. She reveals her plans to take out the bloodline of Kagan, having gathered Zarensky's whereabouts from another child of Kagan she vanquished, the so-called Snake Woman Delinda, who was taken out before the events of this game. Zarensky escapes by turning into bats, but he won't get away for long. Zarensky pits his Children of the Night against Rayne, and Rayne must endure some more perilous platforming to approach him. Zarensky flies away, transforming into bats when Rayne gets near, and Rayne has to use her powers to locate Zarensky and shoot him out of the air for him to materialize long enough for Rayne to land a fatal blow. The battle is quite a back and forth affair, scaling highs and lows with brutal blades whirling and a barrage of blasts firing, until a definitive finish, whereafter Rayne gains a new power of super speed from vanquishing her powerful rival. But that isn't all Rayne finds. Rayne procures a list from Zarensky's remains detailing the whereabouts of the remaining cult of Kagan, who all seem to be converging in this same city. Now as Zarensky's home, which was wired to blow, crumbles as he just has in the background, Rayne moves on to her next target, and although Brimstone could hardly be pleased with Rayne's recklessness, she has her own mission to pursue, and with Kagan's cult coming to her, it's an opportunity Rayne can't resist. Elsewhere, members of the cult of Kagan meet, dedicated to continuing Kagan's will of vampire supremacy, and a world where humans are merely cattle. Mad scientist Zerx Mephistopheles and the shadowy ephemera converse, spurred by the news of Zarensky's demise. They confirm his plans and purpose were a success, however, eliminating many powerful people throughout the city at his gathering, and leaving a power vacuum wide open in the city. Before ephemera fades away, Zerx shows her something he's been working on, a man-cow, which as he describes, in a manner of speaking, was derived from an entity known as Slez, who resides below the city. The man-cow was created as a source of blood for the vampires, in the event their human cattle wears thin. Ephemera takes a bite, but she isn't impressed. They'll have to work on the taste. In the city that never truly sleeps, Rayne and Severin meet in O'Leary's cow bar. The streets have become empty, and many of the night walkers have vanished. The vampires have grown bolder, and now attack more bravely. As Rayne and Severin make their plans, evil crashes in, and makes a hell of an entrance. With Rayne trapped by the flames, she has to make another way out of the bar to continue her quest. After the dust has settled from the explosive situation, thugs have taken over the bar, the street, and seemingly the city to a certain extent. At the top of the bar there's no way out, so Rayne feeds thugs into the ventilation system until it blows a hole in the wall to escape. It's a dirty job, but someone's got to do it. Finally outside of the bar, and onto the mean streets of Rage, Severin informs Rayne from afar via communicator that there's been heavy activity at a place called Ray Ray's Meats, so Rayne makes her way. There's a little more awkward platforming and puzzle solving on the way past the ruined alleys and rooftops of the meatpacking district towards Rayne's destination. But Rayne does get the opportunity to feed thugs into a trash compactor, and after Rayne takes out the trash, Rayne encounters a more powerful enemy, the Kestrels. The Kestrels are a group of 7 identically dressed Dhampir assassins, and their target is Rayne. The first Kestrel taunts Rayne from a distance, making Rayne work her way to them. These enemies are very powerful, especially if you don't know how to block, and just as Rayne puts one down, another is waiting to strike from the shadows. The battle is fierce, but once another one bites the dust, Rayne may proceed, following the enemy. Rayne finds herself at Union Station, through the abandoned station train bay. Here Rayne is met by more Kestrels, who insist they've not come to play, but to take over. They go as far as to offer Rayne a place amongst their ranks, but Rayne prefers her indie status and opts to stay a free agent. An explosive battle ensues. Rayne dispatches her enemies and interrogates a remaining Kestrel, who reveals they plan to reconvene in a nearby club called Club Strangers. Routing the Kestrels also garners Rayne a new technique to add to her repertoire of combos, finishers, and powers. A powerful melee move called Silver Circlet. Rayne then pursues the retreating Kestrels and drops into an abandoned shopping tower en route to Club Strangers. On the heels of the Kestrels, Rayne is blocked temporarily in a crumbling former shopping complex. Thugs are then set upon Rayne, and Rayne uses the thugs as a makeshift connector to open an electric gate that has been set up blocking her path. Cutting through all the opposition on her way, Rayne finally catches up with her prey, and breaks into Club Strangers. Unfortunately for Rayne, it's a trap. Rain's persistence has allowed her to become trapped in a blood field, with the Kestrel watching on, dropping the beats from the booth and sending in endless thugs to try to deal with Rain. Unable to leave the magical blood field that contains her, Rain in combat flings the thugs she battles to the speakers mounted around her. The feedback is too much for DJ Kestrel to handle, and the would-be disc jockey is blown away, destroying the blood field. Rain then proceeds on, making her way to the upper area of the bar, where there's an area where Rain must use her grappling device to bring down the roof in order to proceed. Finding that particular area and what to do there actually had me stuck for quite a while, but regardless, what lies beyond is worth the wait, as Rain heads into another boss battle. Rain scales onwards and upwards to a clock tower of sorts, as Rain prepares for her first dance with the mysterious ephemera, another vampire spawn of Kagan, and another on Rain's hit list. I should also point out that around this point I finally figured out how to block and defend myself in battle. I imagine that some of the bosses beyond this point are probably impossible without these techniques. Anyway, the destruction Rain has caused so far begins to bring down the environment around her. To Rain's frustration, Ephemera plays with Rain, ghosting away as Rain approaches until Ephemera disappears, leaving the tower falling down around Rain. After the fleeting conflict, Rain observed enough of Ephemera's abilities to learn the Ghost Feed technique. As the tower crashes down around Rain, she finds herself down in the sewers after the tower has fallen. The underground is well travelled by creatures of the night, and the Kestrels make themselves known, taunting Rain to pursue. With Severin's guidance and renewed motivation for her mission to eliminate the cult of Kagan, Rain once again chases after the fleeing Kestrels, who may once again take her closer to her targets. The underground access tunnels are a very hazardous environment for those of a vampiric persuasion, especially given the great bodies of water which are fatal to vampires and are still harmful to Dhampir. What's more harmful to our Dhampir hero is that the thugs in this environment onwards are upgraded, carrying more melee weapons that block feeding attempts unless they've been disarmed or dismembered, whichever comes first. And the enemies also take to mounting machine gun placements, which in fairness can also be stolen by Rain by getting rid of the operator, letting Rain get some heavy damage into her adversaries. The vampires down here are herding captured humans deeper into the sewers. Rain's first roadblock is a waterfall barrier, but thankfully the aforementioned machine gun placements make short work of some gas tanks placed near the barrier, and with those blown away, Rain can platform onward. Severin informs Rain that she needs to go deeper, and Rain makes a hole to descend. Rain slides deeper underground, sensing something big beneath her feet. As Rain makes her way through an old service tunnel and into a water treatment plant, she encounters more thugs blocking the way the Kestrels travelled. Tunnels that lead further below have been flooded by water pumps, making them impassable, and Rain needs to deal with that to proceed. However, the thugs have taken to strapping bombs to themselves to blow Rain away, so Rain contends with the bombers as she seeks to take the water pumps out of service to drain the tunnel she needs to take. After the first pump is deactivated, but before Rain can take another step in the right direction, a Kestrel, enraged that the bombers were blown up without Rain, challenges our hero. The Kestrel meets a timely end, and with that, Rain learns a new, more powerful and appropriately named weapon upgrade, Blood Spray. The other water pump required to drain the tunnel forward has been sabotaged, as Rain was distracted during Rain's fight with the Kestrel, and now this water pump can't be turned off, which would damage Rain's plans if not for the thugs being a plentiful resource with which to pummel the last pump to stop it pumping. The tunnel leads down to an old smuggling route. Severin informs Rain that the vampire minions are getting braver above ground, making the long night into a living hell, and enforcement is struggling to hold out for the light to wash away the darkness. Whatever the cult is planning, it's serious. What else is pretty serious is shortly after Rain descends, the backed up pumps are back in action, sending a high tide down the tunnel. Rain has to find some creative solutions to escape and to cross the water down below. All the while an eerie, omnipresent voice calls from the dark descent. Something else is down here. Rain discovers the human prisoners have been taken through this way, and Rain watches as escapees are obliterated by a monstrous creature that Rain glimpses, and we see for the first time. A brute. A horned bestial turned vampire, charging around 15 feet tall and brimming with bestial strength. Thankfully for now, this was just a glimpse of what's to come. Rain moves away and breaks the walls down and finds her way to a water turbine area. The ground is shaking, and the tremors are coming from something far larger and scarier than the brute Rain glimpsed earlier. The way forward is blocked again, but Rain uses the thug she's fighting to break the water turbines and make a way forward. Severin then informs Rain that if the vampires had broken into the subway system, it'd be through the access tunnel up ahead, and surmises that the city's worth of captured people could be up ahead as well. Also onwards, something large lurks in the darkness, residing forward in the water treatment area. It's something ancient, and an old and evil force. Slez, Kagan's brood mother, hiding layered deep beneath the city. Slez reveals she's been dealing with her brother Zerx to Rain, and Rain finds out from Severin that Slez is on the Kagan family tree, so Rain sets her sights at eliminating the monster that the Brimstone Society knows as a Babylonian winged Shakab. An ancient, born vampire such as Slez is incredibly tough and impervious to normal attacks, and can only be felled by destroying the heart. Slez summons her servants and immediately attacks Rain, and Rain decides a more concussive offense would cut to the heart of the matter. As Slez hurls projectiles, including her own attendants at Rain, Rain uses her harpoon grapple claw to deflect the explosive equipped minions into Slez, eventually lowering her defenses for a final strike and a shot to the heart. Once the ancient vampire is defeated, Rain's experience allows her to acquire a powered up version of Blood Rage, known as Blood Fury. Rain then climbs up to a tunnel that Slez was guarding, then follows the vampires into the subway. Defeating Slez would have originally released a good aligned Kagan descendant, much like Rain, who would have aided Rain on her battles, but this content, like other ideas, were cut due to developmental time constraints, so Rain goes it alone here. We now see a cinematic sequence, as Ephemera, an evil vampire descendant of Kagan, verbally jousts with Feral, another of Kagan's daughters, and would-be half-sister to Rain technically. They discuss the news of the downfall of Slez. Feral speaks of testing something known as the Shroud with Zerx, and the two daughters of Kagan, in typical evil villainous fashion, plan to take over and rule the entire Kagan cult themselves. Ephemera leaves to take care of Rain, the so-called renegade Dhampir as she calls it, but before she goes, Feral asserts her dominance, and reminds Ephemera that Feral is the fastest and strongest, and Ephemera best remember that. Sometime later, Ephemera pays a visit to Rain, as Rain crosses the subway path. Rain teases Ephemera, as Rain informs Ephemera that she saved Severin, her now Brimstone contact from Ephemera. Severin was Ephemera's former lover, and a vampire prodigy, and although Ephemera may still haunt Severin's dreams, Rain prevented him from being fully twisted into vampire by Ephemera. He remains only partly tainted by his former ball and chain, as Rain puts it. Ephemera doesn't engage, however. Instead, she and her Shadow Legion stalking in the dark invite Rain to follow, almost certainly into a trap, but at this point, how could Rain resist? Rain is led to the wet works. Whatever the vampires are doing here, it can't be good. The bad guys are locking down the facility and the sun is up. As a Dhampir, Rain isn't destroyed by sunlight, but it will hurt her, so Rain needs to stick to the shadows. In the gated electrification silos section, which Rain first comes to, Rain is able to use the enemy defenses against them. Rain also uses the enemies themselves to open the way. Rain then comes to a giant Tesla coil, and needs to lower the safety fence to access the maintenance hall to get further in. Whatever the enemy is doing here, it sure needs a lot of power. Things get more interesting as Rain moves on. The wetworks aren't working water, but an oceanic amount of blood. And what's even more grim is that this is Rain's first combat encounter with a brute. The gigantic Minotaur-like turned vampire acts as a mini-boss in this area, and it's a tough challenge. But once Rain puts down the hellish creature and reaches the upper levels, it becomes clear that the brute isn't the only shocking thing Rain has to deal with. Now above a Tesla coil, Rain sends an enemy with an electric personality supernova into the Tesla, and the Big Bang releases the way forward. Rain positively charges onwards, following the flow of blood and electricity. Another Tesla coil is blown away as Rain proceeds, and Rain powers on, dropping down to the mess hall area beneath it. At this point, it becomes clear that the people taken past this point have been juiced. But with so much blood, what could it all be for? Rain will have to shed some light onto this nightmare. But speaking of illumination, outside the sun shines brightly still for now, which is bad for Rain. Sticking to the shadows, Rain must contend with a bit of platforming and traversing the burning heat of a hot day to gain the relative safety of cover in a mess hall. Now if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. From here, Rain continues to cook enemies until a new foe comes to bear. The Foreman. This blood-soaked apron-donned, large-turned vampire is carrying a huge and heavy hammer, and he knows how to use it. And the Foreman has come to wreak havoc and raise hell. And this is one hell of a battle. But once the hammerer has been hammered down, Rain conducts some elevator action platforming to find her way outside, where she encounters another Dhampir assassin, who is much easier to bring to light when you actually know how to defend yourself. Once defeated, Rain learns a new move from fighting this adversary called Quiet Thunder. But since the bad guys won't come quietly, Rain brings them down kicking and screaming. As Rain moves on, Xerx demonstrates what he's been working on to Feral. After an unfortunate subordinate is fried in the sun, Xerx unleashes a sample of the Shroud. This substance, which is made from the blood of the innocent, blocks out the sun, so the not-so-innocent vampire brethren can do their evils in the day. Feral declares that the shroud-producing tower they've been working on will make enough shroud to cover the whole city, and with that, they will destroy the race of man. Severin and Rain realize the severity of the shroud, as the red clouds pumped into the sky would allow vampires to walk in daylight and ultimately take over. This could be the end of the world as we know it. This has to be stopped, or else it will be a vampire apocalypse. Rain battles past another foreman to stride on, but is blocked at the chemical processing control area. But Rain is able to redirect the chemical flow with the aid of some unwilling participants, and the caustic chemicals burn down the barrier. Rain barges on in this industrial hell, besting the oncoming opposition, including another fierce foreman as she goes. She arrives at the turbine section, which, let me tell you, really sucks. It's defended by another frenzied foreman, and as much as Rain would love to feed enemies into the fans, Rain has bigger fish to fry, so to speak, so she blows them off to get a lift away from that action. but it's out of the frying pan and into the fire, as lying in wait for Rayne's ascent is another Dhampir assassin. And she's way stronger than some of the previous Dhampirs Rayne damned to hell before. Diligently dodging the blades and slicing back in retort, Rayne can finally dice up this Dhampir. And the experience teaches Rayne a new ability with her firearms. Blood Bomb, an explosive attack that deals a lot of damage, but it also uses a lot of blood. Speaking of a lot of blood, Rayne now drops down into a sea of red, as she finds herself in the Bone Crusher's area. If after what she's seen so far was any indication, any hope left of saving the civilians is dwindling, as they may have already been ground up to form part of the Shroud. Rayne delves deeper into this hell and encounters the fires of hell. A furnace of flames and another security blockade greet Rayne. The bad guys must be mad, trying the same thing again and again, expecting different results. And yet, another blocked path won't stop our deadly Dhampir. Where there's a will, there's a way. And like many solutions in this game, this situation is solved by flinging enemies into objects. These chemical factory flames can be too hot to handle, and Rayne blows out the fire and moves on. Outside, in a loading bay, it's suns out, guns out, as a load more thugs assault Rayne from weapon platforms. There's also two brawling brutes. You'd think this would be one hell of a conflict, but despite their brawn, the brutes can't reach Rayne if she hides inside a building, because they can't fit through the entrance. And more to that point, when they are engaged, what the brutes have inside they lack in brains. And with such a big area to run around in, the brutes can easily be lured into the light, which slowly but eventually will burn them up. So once the brutes are toasted by the sun, and not by the sword, Rayne can saunter on to her next destination. Rayne now begins her ascent of the Shroud Tower with a sense of urgency, as Rayne's not just fighting for her own revenge, but for the good of the world as we know it. At this time, Feral orders the final batch of prisoners to be processed, and the evildoers prepare subway teams to rise to the surface and raise hell once a shroud is released. This comes with the cruel reality that anyone left to save has just been fed to the grinder. So Rayne hands out some payback. Rayne follows the trail of blood, and here Rayne sees the final stages of development, as the people are ground up and bled into vats, and the remains are pumped out as sludge. The blood is infused with chemicals, which Severin identifies as weird arcane stuff, to create the shroud, and it funnels to the central tower in the compound. With a destination in sight, Rayne heads for the tower to put a stop to this nightmare, grinding bad guys to pulp along the way. Feral senses Rayne's disturbance and disruptive presence, and invites Rayne to battle atop the tower. With that, Rayne's coming to get Feral, and Feral's getting frustrated as the time of reckoning draws closer. Rayne's not just coming for Feral, however, as along the way Rayne seeks to sabotage the systems of the tower and smash the machinery creating the shroud. If Rayne can bring the tower down before it's too late, that should stop the bloodshed. It's no easy task, however, as the ascent is guarded fiercely by thugs and foremen, and it's a dangerous rise for Rayne and a deadly fall for her adversaries. When it comes to the machinery pumping shroud up the tower, you probably already guessed that Rayne needs to throw enemies into it to disable it, like everything else. Eventually, that makes a way forward, past another furious foreman, and into another perilous rise through the tower's insides, until Rayne eventually tunnels through to the heart of the machine. This heart is surrounded by devices sharing the workload of blood oil, but they're too tough to dismantle. In a genuinely nice change of pace, Rayne doesn't actually destroy these herself, as Rayne tricks the foreman enemies she's fighting into pounding the ground-up machines with their massive hammers. With those disabled, Rayne can truly cut to the heart of the matter, and leave the thugs and foremen behind, as she finally reaches the peak of the tower. Whilst it is nice to get out, this is no time to enjoy the view. Rayne's playmate Feral is waiting for her, and playtime's over. Feral makes wild claims of ruling the concrete jungle below her, but Rayne aims to bring everything Feral built down. Feral's fighting prowess is as ridiculous as she appears, and Feral's previous boasts of being the strongest and fastest are founded in fact. Instead of directly combating Feral and the sea of minions he sends to thrash Rayne, Rayne must destroy the shroud pumps webbed around the tower top to bring this fight to a close. The biggest problem in this battle is that the outside light is harmful to Rayne, and this really is no time to enjoy the view, as the still shining sun slowly burns away Rayne's health. Fortunately, if Rayne can dodge and stay away from Feral long enough, Rayne can feed on some of the influx of thugs and regain her strength to fight on. It's an enduring battle as Rayne steers clear of the seemingly invincible Feral and deftly leaps and climbs along to destroy the multiple components of the tower to take them out of commission. After an arduous, hard-fought back-and-forth battle, eventually the Shroud Tower is brought to ruin. In the wake of the tower's destruction, Rayne is pinned down in the ruins. Rayne is forced to watch on as this nightmare hasn't ended. It has only just begun. Rayne watches a ghost from her past, Kagan, her vampire father, in the flesh, who is not dead and gone as she believed. The vampire overlord has been behind these plans all along. Kagan is furious that the tower has been destroyed. When Feral seeks backup against Kagan from Ephemera, Feral finds herself betrayed. And when Feral strikes out against her maker, Ephemera stabs her in the back. Ephemera reminds Feral that even though Feral is stronger and faster, Ephemera is cleverer, and trusting Ephemera wasn't the smartest idea for Feral. Feral vows that this isn't over to Ephemera, as Ephemera throws Feral to the depths below the tower, and seemingly to oblivion. The advantage here is that Ephemera believes Feral took care of Rayne in her final act, unknowing that Rayne watches on pinned from a distance. Kagan demands the shroud to flow, as he wishes to stride across what he calls his kingdom as an emperor. Once Rayne is free, she verifies Kagan's blood and rejoices at the prospect of putting down Kagan herself, learning a new ability to freeze time from Kagan's blood and the battle she just endured with Feral. But that's all the good news, as everything else is bad. The Shroud Tower Rayne stands in wasn't the only one, and red fills the sky. You know the rest. It's the end of the world as we know it, as the children of the night flood the surface, making music of the screams and death of the surface dwellers. Kagan watches over his new kingdom, with parts of the Vesper shards infused on his face and arm. Kagan's daughter Ephemera stands by his side as the human world crumbles, and the cult of Kagan's realm is born from the ashes of our world. This is the fall of man. The vampire age has begun. Down on the ground of the new world, Rayne and her advisor Severin assess their current crisis and lament the dire situation. Even though Rayne did everything right and stopped the tower, unbeknown to them, there were other Shroud Towers ready to fire, and they couldn't stop the Shroud from taking over the city. Now, at the end of the world, Brimstone is gone. Severin advises that they run, but even though civilization has crumbled, Rayne's desire for vengeance still burns strongly, and Rayne sets her sights on Kagan. Kagan's tower is the only skyrise left standing, as the rest of the world crumbles. With a destination in sight, first Rayne must cross the twisted path that she finds herself in. Rayne now crosses the threshold of a zoo entrance, and into the new wild world that awaits her. With a new terrible environment, new enemies emerge. Ephemera's ninja warriors are on the hunt for Rayne. These enemies are deadly, wielding a combination of sharp swords and shurikens. A crashed helicopter's flames block the path onwards. trapping Rain with ninja opposition. These enemies are extremely capable, but are also capable of breaking the barrier, as Rain throws the ninjas into the still whirling helicopter blades to break the way onwards. The closer Rain gets to Ephemera, the worse things get, as the ninjas aren't the only elite force under Kagan's lieutenant, Ephemera's command. The park is also crawling with Shadow Legion, and the animals at the zoo are ready for feeding, as the Shadow Legion make themselves known. Once Rain has painted the park crimson with her new enemies, and the way forward has been cleared, Rain charges on. If you thought it would be safer inside than out, you would be wrong, as the horrors of the Shroud have had unnatural effects on the insects of the area. Hordes of cockroaches and other bugs have apparently been turned vampiric by the Shroud. Rain first encounters these monstrosities nesting inside the still twitching bodies of zookeepers pinned to the walls. These monsters seem to nest and produce inside the bodies of their victims. When disturbed, they can congregate together into a humanoid shape and attack. There was going to be a dead woman known as the Roach Queen, which possibly would have been another daughter of Kagan, controlling the insect swarms, but this was cut from the game, leaving these terrifying terrors a largely unknown horror to contend with. The only good thing about these insect swarms is that they attack anything that moves, which sounds like a bad thing, but it's actually good, as they attack indiscriminately and can be set upon enemy vampires as well. The insect swarms are impervious to most attacks and can only be destroyed by fire. With that said, another monster to fight is like another day at the office for Rain, and Rain blasts onwards. There's a lot of enemies past this point, and using Rain's abilities is essential here, slowing time to feed on vulnerable enemies to regain health, and using blood rage powers to deal heavy hits is helpful. With the zoo full of animalistic annihilation, Rain faces off against another Dhampir assassin, a foe far more deadly than many of the monsters she's encountered thus far. A crazy whirlwind of blades ensues between the two Dhampir warriors, but eventually, through a long and dexterous battle, Rain eventually comes out on top. The experience of defeating the Dhampir unlocks a new power for Rain. Using the twin dragon weapons, Rain can now produce Blood Flame. Better late than never, Rain has handily learned a perfect solution to the insect swarms that plagued her previously. Rain's path takes her back outside, tunneled between wrath and destruction around her. Once again it appears that the only way forward is blocked, in this case by a woodcutter. Thankfully some enemy ninjas are offered by Rain into the machine, and their severed services clear the way for Rain to move on. As Rain meets a clearing in the chaos, the vampires are battling the roaches tirelessly. But Rain isn't left out, as the Shadow Legion have their target in sight. But the target turns the tables on the hunters. Severin advises cutting through a nearby aquarium as the quickest route to Kagan, and to dodge some outside conflict on the way. Severin's suggestion immediately proves troubling, as the aquarium is flooded, which possibly provides security from the vampires, since the water is fatal to them, but it's also dangerous to Rain as a Dhampir as well. So Rain must tread carefully. Unfortunately, this area isn't abandoned, and the tanks of water inside can be broken and used as traps by the enemy to prevent Rain from proceeding easily. Likewise, however, on the other hand, Rain can also use the traps against the bad guys, flooding the enemy as she goes. The main exhibit hall of the aquarium is flooded as well. Severin informs Rain that there's a drainage tunnel underneath the floor that she should access, so Rain sets about making an impact. It'll take more than just jumping up and down to break the ground, however, so Rain has a whale of a time applying enough force to drop the floor, and takes the tunnel shortcut back outside. Ephemera is close by, and as Rain gets near, she must face off against more minions and monsters along the way. After mowing down the thugs and fighting the hulking foreman in her path, Rain finally reaches Ephemera. Ephemera is shocked to learn of Rain's survival from Feral, but Ephemera has aspirations above Kagan and needs rid of Rain before she can rid herself of Kagan as well. The treacherous Shadow Witch teases Rain and vows to rekindle her old flame with Severin once Rain is out of the picture. Ephemera doesn't fight fair and has slyly distributed her magic around the arena in which Rain fights her, and Ephemera can only be defeated by breaking these magic seals throughout the environment, weakening Ephemera for the final blow. Ephemera also calls in aid from her ninja warriors and other servants, which actually gives Rain a chance to replenish her health from their blood during the contest. Once all the magic seals are broken, Ephemera doesn't stand up in a fair fight to Rain, and Rain can finally cut down the Shadow Witch for good. After the battle, Rain has learnt enough to gain a new power to enthrall, which allows some enemies to be charmed by Rain, fighting alongside for a time. Speaking of fighting alongside, albeit unintentionally, Rain isn't the only one with Kagan in her sights now. Feral, who apparently survived the fall from the Shroud Tower, has newly turned some of her most loyal subjects. Embracing the change and thirst for vengeance, Feral orders her Angels of Death to fly directly towards Kagan. Staying out of sight, Rain catches a ride from one of the helicopters the Mad Army is taking to the Tower of Kagan. Meanwhile, Kagan and Zerx unveil a new weapon, the Sun Guns, powered by parts of the Vesper shards. Feral's oncoming attack is inadvertently an excellent proving ground for Zerx to test his new creations, and Kagan demands no prisoners from the encounter. As Feral's forces approach their target, it's a slaughter, but not in the way they intended, as the Sun Guns down the flight of angels and send them crashing down to Earth. Rain breaks off and manages to crash into Kagan's tower, coming face to face with Zerx Mephistopheles. Inside of Zerx laboratories, the Grand Inquisitor, as he calls himself, Zerx, locks himself away in a control room. Zerx then sets his assistants to dissect Rain and controls sun-blasting weapons from afar. Rain has to take out these platforms whilst contending with their operators in order to make it viable to crack Zerx out of the can he's hiding in. After Rain's chopped down the sun blasters, Zerx predictably retreats. Rain then raids Zerx's lab for upgrades for her Carpathian twin dragons and obtains the Blood Hammer Blast, a rocket projectile with a more powerful punch. Rain will need powered up powers like that as she follows Zerx to hell. Rain then enters the next section of the building that Kagan occupies, the Lulin corporate offices, and it's a tough day at the office as Rain encounters heavy resistance, including a charging brute. Thankfully, these monsters are more aggressive than they are clever, and Rain can trick the brute into taking the quick way back to the surface, crashing through a steep window at Kagan's tower. That's gonna leave quite a mess when it lands. Anyway, Rain heads upwards past some shockingly damaged interiors inside the tower due to the coming conflict. But this is the least of Rain's problems, as the floors are crawling with enemies. Rain can regain some health in a hidden blood fountain area, but Rain doesn't need a blood fountain to become showered with blood, as her blades assist with that enough as it is. Meanwhile, the blood continues to flow as battle intensifies amongst the forces of Feral and Kagan. The distraction provides Rain cover as she continues to press forward, until a sudden stop in a server room pits Rain against one of Zerx's creations, the Bio Armor. These headless living weapons fight in a similar fashion to brutes, and they are daunting opponents for a hero to conquer. But conquer Rain does, and Rain moves past the fight and fire and ascends up Kagan's tower with unrelenting desire and rage. Unfortunately for Rain, an even more dangerous opponent is waiting for her as she continues to climb up. Kagan's elite. Ancient turned vampires that are heavily armored and are proficiently armed with a deft sword in one hand and a heavy machine gun in the other. These enemies were amongst the first turned by Kagan, and he trusts them completely, which makes it all the more pleasing for Rayne to take them down. Just after this fierce competition, it goes from quality to quantity, as the next area Rayne moves into is filled with heavy weapon wielding thugs and multiple bio-armors, crafted by Zerks. It feels like an endless stream of enemies, but Rayne's relentless rage brings it to an end. The next area is defended by a creature known as the Unraveler. The Unraveler uses its elongated limbs to spider around its lair like a deadly maze, spitting acid at Rayne from afar. This labyrinth is also populated by Kagan's minions, which thankfully feeds Rayne, and their blood can also be used to fuel her firearms, so she can launch a long-distance attack back at the Unraveler. Once the Unraveler has been unraveled, Rayne levels up to learn Bloodstorm, an attack that causes a hurricane of blood around Rayne, damaging enemies but consuming her blood quickly. The next section Rayne gets to of the building Kagan conquered is a media center. Rayne arrives at a printing press, and they'll print anything these days. Rayne turns the page and presses on to encounter another deadly Dhampir. As with other bosses and mini-bosses, besting this baddie earns Rayne a new technique. Rayne learns Curtain Twice Torn from her enemy, and these moves are really useful to use, as some of them can instantly take out comparably weaker enemies like thugs in a single fell blow. Rayne is then pitted against more dangerous foes in a newsroom, as more of Kagan's elite come forward to push back Rayne. But it's bad news for the bad guys, as Rayne hasn't come to play, she's come to win. A victorious Rayne moves outside the newsroom, and the stage is set for another bloody contest. Rayne uses the scenery to break down into a break room directly below to proceed, but there's no rest for the wicked here, as the only thing breaking will be another of Kagan's elite when Rayne's done with them. Casting aside the enemies here and sending some of them crashing below, Rayne moves onto a sky bridge and runs into another Dhampir assassin. Who would have imagined that Kagan's stronghold would be so well defended? The Dhampir assassins are always skilled opponents, almost equally adept as Rayne in battle, but Rayne bests the enemy once again and crosses the sky bridge. Heading up to the roof, there's not much further to go. Kagan has nowhere to hide, and Rayne's nearly caught up to him. Rayne also catches up to Feral, who's eager to take on Kagan herself. Feral fervently charges ahead, and unfortunately, her animalistic rage has her run directly into a burst of sunlight. Feral's original concept art had her depicted in red and using fire powers, which seems somewhat ironic now, as she sure got heated here, and it's too hot to handle for Feral. Ultimately, this is Feral's final end. The blast came from Zerks, who inhabits a super mech suit, a supersized version of the bioarmor he invented, which he prepared for the Overlord to protect him from the lethal rays of the sun. Zerks has learnt much from the Vesper shards as he pieced Kagan back together from his downfall at Brimstone, and Zerks plans to use the power of light they've harnessed from the shards to crush Kagan's enemies. This area is filled with sun cannons, and it's also filled with slowdown. At least it was at the time I recorded this. Hopefully it has been patched by now. Regardless of the pace making this fight more difficult, this is a very arduous battle. Rayne can't pause for a moment, or a blast of sunlight could have Rayne sharing Feral's fate. What's more is that the area is constantly flooded with thugs who will punish Rayne for taking cover from the light. But this can come in handy, as Rayne can use their blood to heal and restock the blood required for her weapons. Zerks initially appears unstoppable, but Rayne can strip away at his armor, firing at the glowing nodes on the super mech suit and crashing the party on Zerg's vampiric paradise. Landing in Kagan's throne room, there's only one thing left to do. It's time for the end boss, Kagan. Kagan won't go down easily. His body has been merged with the Vesper shards, with pieces infused on his face and arm. What's more is that Kagan carries a Vesper-infused glowing sword, with a strike as hot as the sun. This weapon cuts flesh like a hot knife through butter. Kagan also regenerates as the battle goes on, but for all his power and evil posturing, Kagan has made a fatal flaw. As much as I enjoy the sight of Gothic architecture, the design choice of a blood fountain in the middle of Kagan's creepy throne room would not pay dividends for him, as Rayne can directly fuel her blood fury and finally extract revenge on Kagan. Rayne can finally end the cult of Kagan, cutting the head off the snake as it were, with Rayne's vengeance sated and Kagan finally gone. This is the end. But unfortunately, not every story has a happy ending, as the world is still damned to vampiric hell. Severin returns to remind Rayne that there's a lot of people that still need help and are suffering in the Shroud, and Severin even suggests to Rayne to take up the throne. As Rayne is half human and half vampire, she could lead the lost people to the light and put an end to the wild dog vampires roaming the streets, especially now that they control the sun guns as well. Rayne muses that Empress would not be a bad job title, but with jokes aside, the harsh reality sets in. The Brimstone Society is barely holding on against the tide of darkness that has taken the city, and elsewhere, more vampiric overlords seek to challenge Rayne and set their ghastly sights on the city for themselves. There are dark times ahead. Well, that's my unfinished business. But speaking of unfinished, unfortunately, outside of BloodRayne Betrayal, fresh bites. There never was a true follow-up to BloodRayne 2, though, considering Shenmue 2 left a 20-odd year gap between that and Shenmue 3. Just over 2 decades could give us another game. That is, if it wasn't all over. Now you know how the world ended. And with that said, this is the end.